So first of all, thank you again for participating over not just the last 2 days, but more importantly for the last 20 years in our journey. Dasra is not just the individuals that have come through our doors. It's all of you guys and many, many more that could not be here in this room because it only fits 500 people. And I think for us, really the goal has been, as Neera has spoken about, and you've seen the videos, et cetera, is really about how do we enable the sector? How do we catalyze it? How do we create greater collaborative action? How do we, in essence, ourselves become a public good and provide those resources to everyone here and not here to ensure that we're able to move people out of suffering, out of poverty, out of pain faster than ideally ever recorded in human history. And it's with that, we not only are able to bring different forms of capital together, different tools and frameworks, but we're also able to bring different individuals together. Individuals that we've worked with, individuals that have done phenomenal things across the board, and today is one of those situations. Ananth, who many of you guys may have heard in the last few Dasra Philanthropy Weeks, is joining us as a senior advisor. Ananth, thank you. It was in 2015 when we first were introduced to Ananth. That was actually around the time that we were starting two things. Number one, creating a collaborative for democracy and governance, but also looking at finishing and publishing a report on domestic violence. And it was at that stage, it was actually Paresh, from what I recall, introduced us to Ananth, who had recently joined to run the largest new foundation, not just in India, but across the continent, Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiatives. And since that time, we've been lucky, just like we said earlier with Rohini, to have Ananth come speak at our gatherings, give us influence, give us advice. And it was with that we thought it would be an amazing opportunity for us to bring Ananth on board to help everyone in this room and all of our partners to really reach our goals. So with that, Ananth, I'd like to ask the first question, which is, you've done so many things, from starting Greenpeace in India to Amnesty India to starting and running the largest foundation on the continent. Why Dasra?
You know, I think three things. I would say the first thing is the energy and enthusiasm that I have always met with at Dasra. And I think the last month or so when I've met people, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of purpose, I think, and that's something that I have greatly come to value in my life. The second thing I wanted to say is, 20 years is a long time, so, the fact that you guys have staying power, in some sense, that's very good, and that's something that I admire a lot, because it's not easy to build up an organization, especially if you don't have, let's say, captive access to capital, if I may put it that way. So I'm very impressed with that. And I think most exciting thing for me is the fact that, I get to work with everybody. I mean, not just with the team in Dasra. I get to, when I say work, I don't necessarily mean only one way. I get to interact with sort of hundreds of not-for-profits, dozens of philanthropists. So it's very, very exciting to be part of that larger network and to sort of, let's say, bring to bear whatever I know and whatever I've learned. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Great, thank you, thank you. My next question is really about some of the conversations we've had around the SDGs. Clearly, there's these goals that have been set up. They are looking at ending things, whether it's child marriage, poverty, hunger. How do you think we can achieve them as a country?
See, I think one of the most powerful reasons for aligning behind the SDGs is, I would say, that it gives a framework that's actually both comprehensive and specific at the same time. I mean, it's quite rare to find something like that. You can have very specific goals that are almost programmatic, if you like. I mean, I'm going to do this and this will result in that. Or you can have something that's very comprehensive, but in being comprehensive, it loses sight of specificity, measurability, trackability, and so on and so forth. So it seems to me that the SDGs, provide, therefore, a very, very powerful way of creating a common agenda, which, of course, is the cornerstone for building any collective action. I think many people appreciate the comprehensiveness of the SDGs, but I'm not certain if we, as a community, yet appreciate the sort of indivisibility of them in a certain sense. I mean, in those of us that are familiar with the human rights framework, although there are a number of different rights that are listed, any advocate of human rights will always say they are indivisible, in the sense that you cannot trade one of them against another. You cannot say this is more important than that. For example, the idea that somebody must have food before they have freedom, there's something inherently undignifying about it. I mean to go back to a sort of biblical frame, man or woman does not live by bread alone. So the SDGs too, in sort of putting that big canvas together, ranging from climate change to ending poverty, and putting them in one frame, and saying we've got to achieve all of it, allow for aligned actions. I mean, allow for you to take one of them and really push, without losing sight of the others, or without, in some sense, saying, without, in some sense, moving beyond, let's say, the old dichotomies of environment, development, rights, et cetera, et cetera. It allows everybody to kind of work together. So I think it's a very, very powerful framework. It allows us to create mutually reinforcing activities. It allows us to communicate what we do in a cohesive way that everybody can understand. So it's a very, 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 very powerful thing, right? And it seems like, if you study the literature on collective action, and the SDGs provide almost a textbook definition of what we need for collective action. And it seems like the literature also points to the fact that that very often you need backbone organizations to achieve these kinds of goals. And going back to the question of what's exciting about Dasra is, I think possibly you guys are at the cusp of, or we guys, I should say, are at the cusp of being such a backbone organization, an organization that can guide the vision, support activity, establish measurement practices, maybe build some public will, raise money. So all the various things that you guys have been doing for the last 20 years, perhaps with the, let's say, framework of the SDGs, it can perhaps come together in a very, very powerful way. And I think one of the most wonderful things about the backbone is, people don't often talk about it. People talk about the brain, or the heart, or something like that. But the backbone is perhaps spectacularly important, and it's not very visible, or it's not very talked about. So I think there's a potential to be that kind of an organization, not necessarily at the front, but the backbone around which the rest of the effort is organized.
Great. No, and yesterday one of the panelists actually spoke about an article that you wrote about in IDR, and they said that you had specifically said collaborations shouldn't happen. That was now the title of the article, or something like that. But if you could explain a little bit about the article itself, and because I think there's a critical piece that you actually speak about much more in that article that I think would be good for people here to sort of hear and understand.
I think the point I was making, I think, even if I say so myself, I think that's not a good reading of the article. I certainly did not intend it that way, or I don't think I even said that. Maybe it came across that way. I don't know. But I think the point I was trying to make is that collaboration is not going to happen by itself. So the question I was asking is that, if you were to ask any group of people, do we need to collaborate? I mean, in this room, and somebody in the morning asked us rhetorical questions for which we couldn't put up our hands, right? Like, will the Tata Foundation and the Reliance Foundation merge? And then, okay, put up your hand. I mean, you'd be really crazy to put up your hand. Similarly, if I were to ask you, who here thinks that we don't need to collaborate with anybody? It'd be very difficult. Who does think that? Is there anybody who thinks that? Right, okay. It would be a very brave person to put up a hand for that, right? So it's what the Americans call a motherhood and apple pie thing, right? So, very difficult to disagree with it, right? I mean, there's a senior IAS officer in Tamil Nadu when I was a college student. He used to tell me that, all environmental discussions in the government of Tamil Nadu used to end up with we must plant trees, right? And so on that you can have no disagreements, right? I mean, everybody says yes, right? So the point I was trying to make is if this is so obvious, the need for collaboration, why doesn't it happen, right? So that's what I was trying to explore. So maybe I dwelt a little bit too much on the difficulties of making collaboration happen. So maybe it gave the impression that I thought that I said it can't happen or won't happen or need not happen. I mean, that's not the point. I think the big point I was making was, and I hold that to be true, is that for collaboration to happen, I think there's a lot of understanding of the hows. How do we work together, right? We know how to bring people together. There are various techniques, and we're learning more and more about them, right? And we are perhaps innovating on them. There are old-fashioned ways, like people sitting in a room. There may be new ways, like a societal platform. I mean, we are figuring out a lot of hows, right? So, but I think what the point I was trying to make was that it's important to know the why. And to me, it seems like at the heart of why is of course the obvious thing that nobody has all the answers, nobody has all the capabilities. But I think also at the heart of the why is we all have our own limited view of the system that we are trying to work with from our own vantage points. And no matter how much we know, no matter how much of an expert we are, that will never be complete. The completion is only in the collective. The completion is only in some way of us coming together and creating a common mind, if you like. Right? So that's the point I was trying to make. So once we appreciate that, then it becomes easier to collaborate, because then the pains of collaboration become worth it. I mean, become things that. So that's the point I was trying to make, rather than say collaboration is not required or is not possible. But I do really believe that appreciating that, for example, I think one of the key ideas, one of the ideas that has migrated from the corporate sector into the development sector, if I may take a minute more, is the idea that markets will solve problems. And I think deep in that idea is Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand. I mean, and the critical thing with the invisible hand is that basically it suggests that if I acted in my own self-interest, there's some, market mechanism that would produce optimal outcomes for the collective, right? I'm just wanting to point out that in the kind of social sector space that we're talking about, right, there are so many externalities, so many public goods, all the things that we know make markets fail, that without a very conscious effort to think collaboratively and to think outside of what seems to be my narrow self-interest is critical to collaboration. And the last point I was making in that article was that's learned behavior, and we got to make the effort to learn it. That's.
No, great, thank you. No, and I think, again, as you guys have now heard and seen multiple times with our videos, et cetera, that for us, collaboration has been key. That is Dasra. We realized very quickly at an early age that as investment bankers, we actually had limited, if no skills whatsoever. And therefore, working with the NGOs on the ground, helping them figure out their models more effectively, helping donors give more effectively, because we also had limited access to our own capital, et cetera, et cetera. I think collaboration has really been the key to how we've been created as Dasra, and really with that full humility, both with the givers, with the receivers, with the government, with academia, more importantly, I think with the communities themselves, who at the end of the day are still single-handedly lifting themselves out of poverty. And so when you think about that, and more importantly, when you think about Dasra, and we're very excited, of course, to have you on board, today we have a room full of intermediaries, NGOs, donors. What should they do Monday morning to sort of change the way they operate? What should they do differently? Of course, keeping in mind they have their own missions, they have their own agendas, they have their own KPIs, but what can they do differently to actually ensure that as a country we're able to achieve the sustainable goals in 2030?
Right. I think that's a tough one, right? So and certainly a tough one to do in 3 minutes or something. But
we'll give you 5.
But we shall endeavor. I mean, anyway. But we shall endeavor. So I think the first thing that occurs to me is I think there is one kind of collaboration that or one framework of collaboration that I think this room represents very well, which is the framework of collaboration between those with financial resources, those with footprints on the ground, those with passion, those with intellect. I mean, I'm not suggesting that people with passion don't have intellects or vice versa. I mean, very often that seems to be a common sort of stereotype. I'm not falling into that, but nevertheless, it seems to be a collaboration or it seems to be a gathering of all that. And there is also an established, let's say, partnership ecosystem, right? I think a lot of I think one thing that we can do differently is be more thoughtful about the mindsets we bring to those conversations. For example, we had a very interesting conversation this morning about what is the right percentage of overheads, or why can't we have 15 or 25 or whatever the number was, and I think Deepa was very shocked that Indian organizations are feeling sort of guilty so there was that conversation. So what if I think the conversation, that whole percentage, that whole conversation comes out of a model where the interaction between the funder and the NGO. Right? I was about to say implementing organization, pull back because they're not just implementing; they're thinking too. They're doing everything. I mean, it somehow seems to suggest that somebody thinks and somebody implements. I mean, so that's a weird weird separation, and totally false, of course. But anyway, so what if that conversation was about not negotiation, but about saying what does it actually take? And what if we can go to the point where there's enough trust to say that the NGO is not going to, let's say, bloat the costs in any way, and there's enough trust in the NGO to accept that the funder might actually understand what they need. So why are we replicating this negotiation? So I would say, can we be more mindful of, so to answer your question very specifically, one thing we can do differently is, can we be much more mindful of the mindset we bring to the various collaborative conversations that we have? And can we consciously bring the mindset that fosters collaboration? The second thing, which I think this gathering perhaps can go some way in improving or exploring further, is the collaboration between different strategies of action. When I was at APPI, I'm not sure if Arvind is still around, but if he was, he would have heard me say this. So to make social change, at least it seems to me that you need many things. You need, I used to call it, you need 5 things, but you could say 6, 4, whatever. So you need seva, you need service. You need sanghatan, you need to bring people together. You need chintan, you need new thoughts. You need ideas and new ways of thinking about, and you need institutions, you need nirman, you need to build things. And you also need sangharsh. You also need, not everything that we want to achieve is win-win. There are going to be, let's say, changes in power relations in society. There are going to be all those, I mean, Rohini referred to it this morning. I mean, as citizens, we know that, a certain amount of vigilance and a certain amount of standing up and making our rights count is important. So in some sense, can one create a collaborative that understands, or collaboration that understands the relative, the merits of all of this, and how does it all come together into one coherent strategy? I think that's another thing that I think would be worthwhile thinking about. All the, let's say the old sort of siloing between these, they are an activist organization, we are a development organization. Can we get out of that and see if we can find a way of thinking about how these different ways can actually contribute to social change.
Great. So, no, thank you so much. I think it is about shifting our own mindsets, changing the dialogue with ourselves and then with the people around us, again, of how we really create impact with those individuals on the ground and make that sustainable. And using the SDGs because it's a pre-agreed upon framework that the government of India has signed up to actually adhere to, using that as sort of the principle of what we all sort of move forward on.
Not just because the government, it also makes sense.
Because it makes sense, yes. Sorry, I assumed when the government signs up to stuff it made sense, but that's another conversation. With that, I wanted to thank you guys for spending the time with us, for being our partners. And I'd like to call the Dasra team on stage. The last few years, we've never had a big enough stage at the Taj to actually all come. So if I can call the Dasra team on stage, that would be fantastic. Everyone, including in the back, the lights, if everyone can come on stage, that would be fantastic.
So firstly, we'd like to thank all of you from the NGOs, the philanthropists, the foundations, all of you who have represented the last 2 days and been with us on this journey over the last 20 years. And this is the Dasra team who have been working hard for all these years and even last 2 days.